graduated with a bachelor's in zoology. I've always known that I'm an organismal zoology girl through and through. However, the organismal lab practicals almost made me second guess that. I've always been, for lack of better terms, naturally good at school. My brain absorbs information spoken to me really well, so I have good recall on things like lectures, which makes me good at tests. I love an exam, but that doesn't really mean much in the grand scheme of things. When I tell you that I walked out of my first lab practical as a very new, humbled baby college student, I mean it. I did really well in microbiology practicals, even physics and chemistry lab practicals. I've taken lab practicals before by that time. I knew what to expect, but organismal felt like not my thing, which was devastating as somebody who wanted to do zoology. I say all this to highlight that I really had to develop techniques to be good at it. I really had to try, and by the end of my undergraduate career, I was no longer being sad after a lab practical. I was acing them. If you've never taken an organismal lab class in general, I'm gonna quickly go over what to expect. I'm gonna be using my invertebrate zoology lab as an example, since it was probably the most difficult class I took as an undergrad. I have those footage of it, and it's just pretty. It's pretty to look at these animals. But the information I'm going to be talking about will be as general as possible, whether you're taking a vertebrate class, a plant class, etc. Should all be similar. I will also be focusing on actual lab classes. Some organismal classes have very field-based labs, which I've taken as well, and the study tips remain pretty consistent, so still applicable. Each lab class will be dedicated to a certain taxa, and you will be observing the organisms of that taxa. The time spent in the lab will be mostly drawing and labeling organisms in your lab notebook, dissecting, and doing other activities that are outlined in your lab book. Most of the specimens you will encounter will be preserved, either wet specimen, dried plants, etc., which does suck because most preserved specimens that teaching labs use look like indistinguishable mush. I had a professor tell me that when he took a lab class, the specimens were so old and nasty that he had to resort to just memorizing which jars each specimen were in instead of the specimen themselves. So that's a hack too, I guess. But I was fortunate enough to go to school on a beach where we had a lot of live inverts to use for lab, which made it a lot more fun and easy to learn. However, most colleges will try to use some live specimen. Even my community college had some educational animals that they would put out for certain labs. But we're going to do what we can with what is given to us. Grading for these labs is usually made up of your lab notebook, 2 practicals, and participation, which is usually attendance. Some labs will have quizzes in between practicals, or maybe a bigger project that is also graded, but I wouldn't count on it. Most labs I've taken are made up of those 3 grading categories. If you've never taken a lab practical before, they are exams specifically for what you learned in the lab. They set up the entire room where there are stations for questions. You walk around the room answering each question. You often have the whole lab time to answer every question, but I have had labs limit the time even less. For organismal labs, you can expect each question to have a specimen and then a question related to that specimen. So you have to be able to, 1, recognize the specimen and know enough about it to be prepared for the various questions that might be asked about it. It might be taxonomical, like what is the genus of this organism? It might be morphological, like what feature or trait does this organism use to blah blah blah, change color, for example. They might give a part of the body and ask its function or its advantage. They could ask ecological questions like what adaptive zone is this organism restricted to, or really anything. But I'm going to tell you how I prepared for the worst and how I got A's most of the time. First things first, you're going to need to read the lab manual. Who said that? Who said that? This may seem silly and obvious, but you would be surprised how many people decide not to ever read it, or halfway through the quarter decide to stop, or just through the semester. Looking back at every lab I took, organismal or otherwise, I was always the only person in my lab group that would read the manual. It gave me a lot of power. Or maybe less power and more responsibility. I always kind of felt like the mother in those classes because they would just hope I knew what to do. So don't be those people. And also, you don't owe anybody anything if you are me in that position. So before every lab, read the lab. And I know you're skipping your reading for your other classes, so put that time in this one. It's worth it, I promise. I promise the reading for the labs is more important than the reading for the lectures. I'm not saying you should skip any, but if you were to, in the lab manual there are usually instructions on activities that you'll be doing for that day and information that will be crucial to knowing for the exams. It will hint at features to look out for, so you will want to be familiar with the vocab and prepared before you actually see the animal. I like to annotate my lab book. I basically underlined information in one color and goals in another. So information are the specific terms to know, while goals are what the lab is trying to teach you and the things you actively need to do while you're in the lab. It'll make everything make way more sense if you already have some base knowledge. Even if it doesn't make sense while you're reading it, it will still help those little brain connections be made. Too often did I read the lab manual and not understand a single thing that I read, but then when I saw the organism, it all made sense. It's just helpful when you aren't hearing or seeing a word for the first time in your life when you're in the lab, where it's already super overwhelming to learn so much in a very short amount of time. Hopefully your lectures and labs are pretty synced, where you'll be learning about the organisms in lecture that you are seeing in lab, but unfortunately, lectures don't always stay on schedule. I always had them a little bit mixed up. So reading the lab is the best way to prepare. Once you're in the lab, I need you to participate. So many people just take pictures of everything and then immediately leave, but considering the lab score averages, I'm not sure that strategy works 100% of the time. There is a reason that organismal labs force us to draw so much. It might suck when you hear that for the first time, especially if you don't like to draw. Hearing that you're like forced to draw, even if you do like to draw, you don't want to be forced to do it. Ew! It might seem silly and annoying to draw very similar things, especially when those things look like little blobs over and over and over again. But drawing forces you to pay attention to details and things you might have missed just looking at them, just looking at a picture of them. Drawing and labeling forces you to understand. So many people say that organismal biology is 100% memorization. I have heard time and time again that biology is not a real science because it is so memorization heavy. I won't get into it. And although I agree memorization plays a huge role in taxonomy and anatomy, which is a large portion of these labs, and I'll talk about those in a second, if you rely entirely on memorization, you are not going to do as well as the people who actually try to understand what they're seeing instead of relying on memorization. Be curious, wonder what the point of each lab was, and what the author of the lab is wanting you to discover. Labs are about discovery. The depth at which you learn is in your hands. So it's up to you to spend time with each specimen and ask questions while it is in front of you. Slight side note, but labs are also likely the time that you are interacting with whoever is teaching that lab at a greater level. For community college, it's usually your professor, important. In higher university, it might be a TA, still very important. This is when they actually see your work ethic, learn your name. I've had a lot of opportunities arise just because I talk to them too much. Because I'm genuinely curious. I accidentally make TAs Google things all the time when I'm in labs, because I want to know. I have questions. But that's besides the point. While you're there as well, take as many pictures of everything that you can. I have had labs that don't allow pictures, which sucks, and makes the drawings and notes you take even more important than they already are. So let's talk about that notebook really quickly. You're gonna spend a lot of time with it, it's likely graded, and it's gonna be important to studying, so it should be something you want to use and that you like using. All of my lab notebooks start with a table of contents, which means I also number all of the pages in my lab notebook before the quarter or semester starts, which makes life a lot easier when each lab will take up multiple pages. It'll also make your TA or professor like you better when they grade it. So in the pages, this is where you, surprise, surprise, take notes. Anything the instructor says or writes on the board that seems important, you're gonna write down. Any questions you have, you're gonna write down. This is where you'll be drawing everything, and I do mean everything. These drawings don't have to be good. They just have to be labeled. Like this drawing, not good. But when I see this on the lab practical, will I know where the siphonoglyph is? Yeah, probably. I think so. I did. I don't know if that was an actual exam question, but I usually did very well on the slide questions. Not only did I label parts of the organism that were in my lab manual, so I knew that I would need to know them, but I would also label the colors that the organism was, textures, how they moved, if they were alive, behaviors, etc. After you spend as much time as possible with the material in class, the deeper understanding comes with the studying at home. There have been many times where I did not understand anything that I saw in lab, but once I spent some time with it at home, it started to make a lot more sense. Similarly to how when you read the lab manual, it might not make sense till you get to lab. What you see in lab might not make sense till you revisit it later. It's all about that repetition. So don't let the difficulty of the material at first intimidate you from learning it. But this is where I start seeming a little bit crazy. Using the pictures I take in lab, I would make a Google Doc master document of every single photo that I took in lab. I would label each photo with the taxonomy expected for me to know, and every piece of information about that organism that is in the lab manual or that I learned about in class. Everything. I would have sections for vocab words, everything. Keeping this master document updated throughout the course kept me accountable and made looking back at things really easy with just a quick search. It was really important for me to keep this updated on a weekly basis. If I went into the new week behind on it, then it would become way too overwhelming, I would not come back to it, and all the steps that follow this first step wouldn't get done because I would have already felt like I failed. I was also a little sweetie pie and always shared this document with my lab group mates, which made me feel a little bit greater of a responsibility to keep it updated, which was not necessary at all. You don't need to do that, but thought I would add it if it would help you also keep your master document updated, or if you want to be a sweetie pie, because at the end of the quarter, this master doc was over 200 pages, and those lab group mates would probably kill for me if I had asked them to for giving them that resource for free. Then, pretty much immediately after updating the master doc, I would make flashcards. I used to be pretty anti-flashcards. I cannot deny their usefulness in memorization-heavy courses, even if it's not fully memorization, and I'll still die on that hill. They are still helpful. Digital flashcards are my go-to. I just used GoodNotes on my iPad because that's what I have and that's what I used for other things, but there are tons of flashcard apps you can get on your phone, websites you can use on a laptop, etc. One of the reasons I like GoodNotes is I could physically write the answers for each card while I was writing the cards, which is very important to me in memorization instead of just copying and pasting everything from the master doc. Is there a more efficient way to do things? Yes, absolutely. But I want to show you how to learn, not be a machine. I think the obsession with efficiency is the death of a lot of good things about being human, but I'm not gonna get into it. I would put each picture I took on a flashcard and then all of the information about it on the back. So there might just be a card that says, what is the taxonomy up to species? And then a picture of it. And then the back of the card would say all of the taxonomy up to species. Or I would put various questions depending on what information I knew about each organism. Then once the cards are made, I pretend it's a little game. If you have friends to quiz you, it can definitely help keep you accountable. But if you don't, I never did. Honestly, I think studying with friends is to my detriment, personally. I feel like I get distracted and confused. But if it works for you, then I support you. Obviously, and I'm only a little bit jealous, a little bit. So what I actually did is I would write out my answers on a piece of paper. I did not say it out loud, I did not just think it, I did not start to think it and then just show myself the answer. I had to physically write something down every single time. This not only helps with remembering, but also with spelling, and a lot of lab practicals I have taken count spelling. Unless you have a really nice professor or TA, spelling often counts. And if I got it wrong while I was practicing, I would write it again, over and over and over again. Is this a form of torture? Maybe. Is it how we punish children for being bad? Yes, but it works. Even if I got the answer partially wrong, I would still rewrite it. Even if I got it right but spelt it wrong, I would still rewrite it. If I got the answer correct, but it was an educated guess and I knew that, you will end the study session with a paper, front and back, full of just taxonomy and the craziest words you've ever seen in your life. But that piece of paper, pure knowledge, baby. Pure, from your brain. If a roommate or like your mom saw this piece of paper, they might think you're trying to summon some type of demon, but you're actually just the smartest biologist ever, probably. So with dissection anatomy, I like to use my iPad again. We'll talk about it if you don't have an iPad. I would use the pictures that I took of the dissection and just repeatedly label that picture on GoodNotes. And once again, we are referring back to the lab manual. Whatever body parts, whatever anatomy is labeled in that lab manual is what you should know where it is and what it looks like and what it does in the animal or organism. Plants also get dissected. Hello, plant people. If you don't have an iPad, another thing that I did, which might even help more than using an iPad, is drawing the animal from memory, drawing every little thing that you remember in it, and once again annotating that, writing out what each thing does, and then referring back to your lab manual, filling in what you missed, and just doing that over and over and over again. It will be time consuming, it will be frustrating, it will be rewarding. I recommend having a study schedule that allows you to go back and review the past weeks so that they stay fresh in your mind, but I would be lying if I said that I never procrastinating studying until a couple weeks before the lab practical. But I would still do pretty well because I had these tools already made for me so that when I started studying, it was once again not the first time I saw those words in my life. The more time you spend with the material, the less it becomes memorization and the more it becomes pattern recognition. It's kind of like learning a language. You're gonna become fluent in taxonomy and anatomy. So I hope some of these tools and tips were helpful to your preparation to get an A on that lab practical. But I want to close out the video by saying that grades do not define you, and I mean it. And I'm talking to the past version of myself when I say it. As I started this video mentioning that my first organismal lab practical was nothing to brag about, I did survive that poor grade. Even though in the moment it might have felt like I wasn't going to. But now, when I interview for jobs, an employer is not going to say, "Wow, you are perfect for this role in every way. I've only got an A on that intro bio lab practical. I guess we're gonna have to move on with other candidates at this time." That's never gonna happen. Some of the smartest people I know get really bad grades. Some of the dumbest people I know get really good grades. It doesn't matter. It's a skill that you can improve on if you have the tools and the dedication. This video is completely different from anything that I have posted before, but a lot of my Instagram audience are younger people who want to go to college for a similar field that I went to college for, or are on the younger side of the college career. So I thought I would share some things that helped me during my undergrad journey. I love school, I miss school, I love talking about school, so if you ever have any questions, DM me on Instagram. It's my favorite thing to talk about. I get a lot of questions about being a zoology major, and I would love to make a long video just about the major. So if you have any questions about that, whether it's undergraduate research experience, the classwork, the labs, the anything, DM me on Instagram or comment. I would love to do that if enough people are curious. So, thanks for watching!